Okay, so our next topic will actually be houselessness in the current sleeping ordinance. So this question will be addressed to Jenn Brown, Drew Glover, Nate Kennedy, and Steve Schnarr. Are you in favor of the town's current sleeping ordinance ban, and why or why not? So we will start with Jenn Brown.
I'm going to say is that I think the end to houselessness is housing. And I think the sleeping ban gets a lot of attention in this conversation, but it doesn't actually lead to any long-term solutions. And when I say housing is the end to homelessness, I'm talking about a wide range of housing. We need to start with permanent supportive housing as a transition from homelessness. That leads hopefully to independent housing that is affordable for people. And we need ongoing case management for people who used to be homeless that not only deals with potentially co-occurring substance abuse and mental health that's not being addressed properly, but also providing job training and other services that are designed to be stabilizing in their lives. That's where I think the city's attention needs to go in the years to come, is actually working to provide and support housing. And also we have to acknowledge that we need stable emergency shelter for people who need that transition from sleeping outside or sleeping in their cars, with the idea that in addition to that, we provide, or there is some provision for case management once they're in emergency shelter.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to Drew Glover.
So thank you for asking the question. Houselessness is a big issue in my platform and just in general with the foundation of creating a climate of compassion. And the current sleeping ordinance or sleeping ban is pretty much the opposite of compassion is in my stance and the stance of my campaign. I think it's irresponsible. It's been found to be unconstitutional by the Department of Justice, looking at refusing people the right to sleep. And it opens up, as has been mentioned, as from fear from the university, it opens up the city for the potential lawsuit, which I'm sure organizations are working on currently to try and overturn the ordinance. So beyond the fact that it is non-compassionate and unconstitutional, it's a really great symbol of the way that the city currently operates with regards to houseless and homeless individuals, led under the leadership of individuals that are currently sitting on council and that have been there for a while now. It shows that instead of looking at ways to increase services, increase resources, and increase upward mobility for marginalized people in our community, we would rather criminalize them and force them to go through litigation processes or tickets, court dates, all of which cost us as taxpayers tremendous amounts of money. Statistically speaking, it costs about 50% as much to house someone and provide them with services than to criminalize them like we currently do right now. And I'm not sure if any of y'all know about the Freedom Sleepers, thank you, which have been going on for over a year now. I think they're in their 60-something week. This is a group of individuals that have been doing direct nonviolent activism outside of the city without any kind of resolution or sympathy shown by those in power. So those are the kind of things that need to change, but in a responsible way by offering 24-hour shelters, warming centers for weather like today where people that have no homes are outside in the rain, and just making sure that we have safe, secure places for them to sleep that aren't putting into question public safety in neighborhoods.
Thank you. Nate Kennedy.
What I've got to say is regarding people being houseless, I know a lot of UCSC students have had to camp out in the woods just because they can't find housing. Regarding the sleeping ban itself, I actually view it as just somewhat of a necessary evil. I mean, it goes along the lines of the no trespassing and no loitering laws, and what I mean by that is that I think if we let anybody and everybody sleep absolutely anywhere they want to, right in the middle of the sidewalk or whatever, that we're gearing for a bunch of trouble there. But at the same time, what I think is really important is that we need to have dedicated areas in the city, parks and so on and so forth, where people can legally sleep. But the key is that when we provide an area, say, if you're sleeping in Henry, I'm trying to think of the name, Harvey West, that's it. It just, the name slipped for a moment. Like, just Harvey West Park as an example, if we say people can sleep at Harvey West, then at an absolute minimum, we need to have 24/7 porta potties available in the area where people can legally stay. And again, just a sanitation issue of people sleeping right on the sidewalk. I mean, it's against the law, but lots and lots of people just do it anyway. They don't really care. And then I walk down the street in the morning, just Pacific Ave or wherever, and I get the foul stench of urine and droppings from people that is because they have no safe place to go. Thank you.
Steve Snor?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So about the sleeping ban, I have opposed it. Don Lane, one of our current council members, proposed changing the wording to remove sleeping from the ordinance. Our current council majority, including Cynthia here, voted against that. I actually agree with Nathaniel that it's not just about ending the ban, it's about having positive designated places for people to sleep. It's miserable out there on this cold, rainy morning. It's violent, people have stuff stolen, women on the street face extreme levels of sexual violence. That's true for the people out there, and it's also true that some unhoused people have negative impacts on our parks and sidewalks and neighborhoods. And so I'm interested in finding positive solutions, finding designated camping and parking areas. There are churches that would be willing to do it. There are things like this, tiny home villages in many other cities, Seattle and Portland, for example. What was the other thing I was going to say? Sorry, folks, I have a headache today. But I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question, will go in the same order, is do you plan to address the lack of rehabilitation centers for issues such as drug and alcohol, as well as mental health resource centers in the city? And if so, how? So we'll go to Jenn Brown.
Yeah, so the city, in large measure, doesn't have the resources to provide for public health. It's the County of Santa Cruz, through funding streams by the state, that provides public health resources. That said, the city is often the jurisdiction that feels the largest brunt of the fact that we don't have adequate public health resources in our county. And so what I think that the city could do is two things. We could work more closely with the county to scale up the resources that they have and make sure that whenever there's an opportunity, we can draw down more resources from the state. Or we could look at a city-wide measure to create additional resources. I mean, that's a conversation we could have. But what we don't want to do is duplicate efforts. What we need to do is make sure that the funding streams and the services that already exist are effective. And when I talk to people in the community about public safety concerns, what I often find when they unpack that for me is that they're talking about problems that are often caused by untreated substance abuse and untreated mental illness contributing to those problems. So I think that we have to get a hold of those issues as a community, and the city, again, like I said, can either work with the county to really encourage that those resources are better deployed, or the city could create its own system. I think that I would prefer the former, and really just making sure that in any way the city can leverage additional resources so that the county provides for our community. That's what I'd like to see us do.
Nick has a quick follow-up for 1 minute.
Yeah, so I have a follow-up. So I don't know if I understand that you feel like that the city has little power in providing more of those resources, and we're just kind of waiting on funding. I'll let you clarify on that. I think you mean that the city does have power, but exactly what do they have power in doing?
Yeah. So what I meant to say is that the city doesn't have a public health department, so it doesn't have a stream of funding, tax revenue-based funding to provide social services, with the exception of a community services allocation that it provides to nonprofit agencies that are providing an array of services, not all of which are rehabilitation or mental health related. They can be other things. So that's one stream of funding that could be increased if we want to, as a community, decide that we want to add additional resources for rehabilitation or for mental health. So we have that ability. But the largest chunk of money in our community that is designed to treat those issues comes from the county, which is receiving those funds from the state. So what we can do as a city is go to the county and say, okay, if this is the largest allocation of funding that we have and resources that we have in our community, we need to see them more effectively deployed.
So do you plan on doing that?
Yes, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been articulating that for months on this campaign trail.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go to Drew Glover.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. So do you plan to address the lack of centers for assisting with drug and alcohol problems, as well as mental health resources in the city, and if so, how?
Absolutely. So that falls again back into that idea of creating a climate of compassion here in Santa Cruz. I think it's really important to point out that, as JM mentioned, the chunk of money comes from the county, but there are allocations in our local budget for social services. For example, there's been drastic cuts in those areas, especially over the past 8 to 10 years, where it used to be approximately 4% of our budget was going towards social service allocations, and now it's been cut dramatically over being overseen by different individuals like Mayor Matthews here on the city council currently. We're about to vote on a measure that would spend $100 million on adding an auxiliary lane to a highway that shows no impact. Instead, why wouldn't we want to reallocate $100 million of money to social services in Santa Cruz and around different areas like that? In addition to that, there are organizations locally like MHCAN, which is a peer-run mental health organization here. And if we can help to bolster those kinds of groups and provide more resources for them, absolutely. But in addition to that, it has a lot to do with community education and access to services. So if we were to run a community education program where we got people out and let them know about the issues facing people in Santa Cruz regarding mental health and their needs, then I'm sure we could raise additional funds that way too, as well as reduce stigmas around people with mental health issues that need service. In addition, there's different forms of access to service. Right now, what the city offers with the county is something called Project Homeless Connect. It's good, right? It provides an option for people to go and get services, but it's horizontally derived, right? You have to go to all these different organizations independently, as opposed to entering in one single portal and then being led to each individual organization that can then eventually end in housing. So I do intend and commit to focusing on that directly once elected.
Thank you. Steve Schnarr?
Yeah, so one thing I've been mentioning on the campaign trail are some comments from our Deputy Police Chief, Rick Martinez, who has said that we can't use law enforcement as a solution to homelessness, or that law enforcement is not the solution to homelessness. I've also heard him say that we can't arrest our way out of the drug problem. And so I agree with both these statements. Just to get back where we were a minute ago, I've heard a lot of people talk about the solution is housing, and I'm all for that, and it's great. And if we have a little bit of money from the federal government to put some people in apartments, that's great. But all the people who are not making use of that are still outside and being criminalized and not having the services that could help them. Now, as far as social service, as Drew mentioned, the city does have a part of the budget, a few percent that goes to social services, mostly through nonprofits. It could be increased. We would like to work to do that. Realistically, even if we increase it to levels where it was 10 years ago, it wouldn't be sufficient to meet the demand. It's huge. I wrote an article that didn't end up getting published, that I had been writing for the Good Times, about the lack of residential drug treatment, and how I talked to Encompass Services, where we can offer about, in this county, about a third of the need, and that's evidently better than the national average. I talked to a woman who had been on drugs since she was young and really wanted to get clean, couldn't get help until she asked multiple times until she got arrested and lost custody of her child, and she fit into a certain category that had funding. So I know it's a huge problem, and I'd like us to do more, and also recognizing that it really would require national priorities. And we could talk about Portugal decriminalizing all drugs and spending money instead of on incarceration and positive intervention and reducing heroin use, but that's not a policy that we can implement on a local level. So, the little things, increasing social service spending a little bit as we're able to, supporting the needle exchange, which is proven to reduce both disease transmission and littered needles, instead of restricting it in response to people who are angry about littered needles but don't have the evidence to understand. And looks like I'm out of time, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Nate Kennedy?
Could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So, do you plan to address the lack of drug, alcohol, and mental health resources in the city, and if so, how?
It's something we really need to deal with as a whole, and I really appreciate hearing what Steve just said about Portugal just legalizing drugs across the board and using the money that was saved towards treatment. The day could theoretically come where something like that could happen in the United States, but I don't think so. And just there's a huge industry, if you will, in the penitentiary system and the war on drugs and all this money that's going towards futile fights. And I don't know. Most people here probably at least heard of that show Breaking Bad, which is about Walter White and and this master meth cook. Well, after watching that show enough times, I've thought, even if we legalize the hardest, craziest drugs like meth, we would still find ourselves in a much better position, because people wouldn't be stealing stuff out of cars, out of homes, and turning around and selling it for a little bit of money for them to turn around and get drugs with, and just pull it out of the darkness, basically. And that's all I got to say for now.
Thank you.